The sound of the phone was a cold, alien shock at *3:17 a.m. *. It was a number I didn't recognize, and I nearly ignored it, but some profound, unsettling instinct, made me reach for the receiver in the absolute darkness. My heart seized the moment the voice on the other end, professional and detached, said, "This is the County General Hospital. We need to speak with the next of kin for a patient named Sarah Jenkins. We believe she is your daughter." My hand began to tremble violently. My daughter, Sarah, died 31 years ago. She was 6 years old, taken from us by a sudden, virulent strain of childhood leukemia. She was buried in a small white coffin in the children's section of the cemetery, and I visit her headstone every Sunday. I try to tell the woman on the phone she had the wrong person, that my daughter was deceased, but the nurse, unflustered, continued, "Sir, the patient had a rare blood type and an even rarer genetic marker that matches a profile registered with your name. She claims her birth name is Sarah Miller." I couldn't breathe. My wife, Laura, and I hadn't been married long when our Sarah was born, and Miller was Laura's maiden name the name we had considered giving our child before we settled on mine. The nurse explained that Sarah Jenkins had been in a severe car accident, was critically injured, and desperately needed a full medical history. But the truth was infinitely more shattering than any medical emergency. When I finally made the frantic, hour-long drive to the hospital, bracing myself for either a cruel mistake or a devastating miracle, I was met not by a nurse, but by a stern-faced detective who sat me down and presented me with a photograph. The woman in the photo had my eyes, Laura's nose, and a small, distinctive birthmark behind her ear. A mark only my Sarah had. The detective didn't mince words. "Mr. Hayes, we believe your wife, Laura Hayes, never buried your daughter. We believe she faked Sarah's death 31 years ago, secretly removed her from the hospital, and erased her existence, all to facilitate her own, deeply disturbing escape from your life." The impossible was true. My daughter was alive, critically injured, and the lie of her death was the linchpin in a vast, decades-long conspiracy orchestrated by the woman I had loved and mourned with for over 30 years. Was I wrong to hope for the miracle of my daughter's return, even if it meant accepting the devastating reality that my entire marriage was founded on a grave filled with secrets? Tell me if you would have simply refused to look at the photo, protecting the fragile memory of the child you thought you lost. To fully grasp the shocking depth of this betrayal, the sheer, sustained effort required to fake a child's death and maintain the lie for 3 decades, you need to understand the fragile, early years of my marriage to Laura and the desperation that must have consumed her. My name is Ethan Hayes and I am 62 years old. Laura and I met in our late 20s. I was a structural engineer, steady, maybe a little dull. Laura was beautiful, charismatic, but volatile. She was prone to dramatic mood swings and possessed an overwhelming need for control. We married quickly. Sarah was born a year later, the light of my life. She was a delicate, bright, imaginative child. Our world fell apart when Sarah was 5. The diagnosis of acute leukemia was a hammer blow. The next year was a brutal cycle of chemotherapy, hospital stays, and the agonizing hope for remission. The core of our instability lay in money and location. Laura hated our small, gray hometown. She dreamed of the California sun and a glamorous life, but my job and my aging parents kept me rooted here. She constantly fought with me, accusing me of trapping her. Our fights became explosive, often centered on my family's old-fashioned values and my refusal to sell my inherited home to fund her dreams. She saw Sarah's illness not just as a tragedy, but as another chain tying her to the town she despised. The terrible climax came just after Sarah's 6th birthday. The doctors delivered the final, crushing news. Sarah had weeks, maybe days. Remission was no longer possible. The grief paralyzed me. Laura, surprisingly, became calm, too calm. She handled all the funeral arrangements with frightening efficiency, insisting on a closed casket. To spare us the image of her pain, she said. I was too broken to argue. The funeral was a blur of rain and shattered silence. Laura was a pillar of controlled grief, but she never cried. We buried the small white coffin, marked the stone, and I spent the next 3 decades believing my daughter was beneath that patch of grass. Laura stayed with me for 5 more agonizing years, a ghost in our house, before finally announcing she was leaving for the West Coast, citing her need for a fresh start. Away from the painful memories, I let her go, believing her flight was an act of self-preservation, not a cover for a decades-old crime. 31 years later, I was standing in the County General Hospital lobby, staring at the photo of the unconscious woman, Sarah Jenkins. The undeniable truth of her face hit me with the force of a train wreck. She was 37 years old. Detective Miller, no relation to Laura, ironically laid out the chronology with chilling precision. He explained that Laura, in her desperation to escape her life, had used Sarah's final diagnosis as a means to an end. Laura was a low-level administrative assistant at the very hospital where Sarah was receiving care. She had access to certain internal medical records and, crucially, to the morgue and transportation logs. The day Sarah was officially pronounced dead, Laura did 2 things. She obtained a corpse, a stillborn child, or a patient with a similar-sized body that was unclaimed or had no next of kin, and placed it in Sarah's designated hospital drawer, preparing it for the funeral home. She meticulously altered the few paper records she could access. Then, under the cover of a massive hospital shift, change, and the fog of my grief, Laura, who had secured Sarah's release using my forged signature on a compassionate release form, hours before the official death pronouncement, took her out of the hospital via a little-used service entrance. Sarah was, by all medical accounts, dying, but she wasn't dead. Laura didn't want Sarah to die in our home, tied to my life. She wanted Sarah to die free, on the road, allowing Laura to mourn privately and then be free of me, with a clear conscience about her grief. But Sarah didn't die. Sarah, against all medical odds, slowly began to recover. The severe leukemia went into a miraculous, total remission, a statistical anomaly that stunned doctors. Laura, now hundreds of miles away, realized she had a problem. A living daughter whose death had been widely publicized. Laura became Sarah Jenkins, and she raised Sarah under a secret identity, moving frequently, ensuring no medical history or genetic records would ever link them back to our small town. The small, white coffin I had cried over for 3 decades held the body of an unknown child, purchased for her escape. The detective explained that the car accident was severe. Sarah Jenkins needed a blood transfusion and a tissue match, triggering the automatic database search that flagged her unique genetic marker, which I, as her father, had provided during her initial cancer treatment decades ago. The medical technology of today had finally caught up with Laura's past. Laura, fearing exposure, had been completely absent from the hospital. The detective had traced Sarah Jenkins's last known location to a modest apartment complex, where neighbors confirmed she lived alone. The detectives' team located Laura under a different assumed name, Jane Doe quickly. She was now a successful real estate broker in an affluent city, living the life she always dreamed of, completely detached from the wreckage she had left behind. She was brought in for questioning immediately, but maintained absolute silence, only demanding to know if Sarah Miller was still alive. A clear slip that connected her to the past. My daughter, Sarah, was alive, severely injured, completely unaware of her true identity as Sarah Hayes, and believing her mother was Laura Miller, who had raised her as Sarah Jenkins. Laura had stolen 31 years of my fatherhood, robbed my parents of their granddaughter, and forced me into a lifelong state of mourning, all to facilitate her own selfish escape and reinvention. So that's the situation I was in. My daughter, the center of my deepest grief, was alive but unconscious, needing my help. Her mother, the woman I mourned with, was a cold, calculating criminal who had literally stolen our child and buried a lie. I had the power to expose Laura completely, ensuring she faced criminal charges for fraud, emotional distress, and possibly kidnapping, which would shatter the carefully constructed reality of woman who was my daughter. Or I could prioritize my daughter's critical health and emotional stability, keeping the secret for a while longer, allowing my daughter to recover before introducing the impossible truth of her life. My first instinct was to drag Laura back here and make her face the devastation she wrought. But my daughter, Sarah, needed me. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have prioritized the immediate criminal justice against Laura? Or would you have chosen to safeguard the fragile, newly discovered life of your daughter? Seriously, let me know what choice you would have made right there. I chose my daughter's life and stability above all else. Laura had stolen 3 decades, but I refused to let her final act be the destruction of the fragile woman who was my Sarah. Justice could wait, healing could not. My first move was to formally identify myself as Sarah Jenkins's next of kin. I spent the next 2 weeks at her bedside. She was in a medically induced coma. I spoke to her constantly, telling her about her grandfather's funny stories, about the home she never knew, about the mother she thought she knew, and about the father who had never stopped grieving her, the unique birthmark behind her ear, the small mole on her left hand. Every detail was hers. The nurse had called her Sarah Jenkins, but in my heart, she was Sarah Hayes, resurrected. I provided the hospital with her full, true medical history, which proved critical for her recovery. I hired a specialized private security team to guard her room, ensuring Laura could not return to erase her mistake. The detective, sensing my pain and my moral dilemma, agreed to delay the arrest of Laura Hayes, but placed her under tight, round-the-clock surveillance, ensuring she couldn't flee the country. When Sarah finally woke up, weeks later, the physical pain was evident, but the confusion was greater. She believed her name was Sarah Jenkins. Her mother was Jane Doe, Laura's alias, and she had no memory of any father. I introduced myself simply as Ethan a family friend who was helping manage her medical care after her mother disappeared. It was a temporary lie built on the foundation of a lifetime of betrayal, but it gave her the space she needed to stabilize. The detective then executed the plan for Laura. They arrested her quietly at her affluent office. They didn't charge her with murder. That was the miracle that saved her, and the proof that Sarah lived. Instead, she was charged with massive identity theft, forgery of medical and death documents, and reckless endangerment of a minor, given that she removed a child in a critical medical state. The charge that resonated most, however, was emotional distress and fraud against me, her husband, for the intentional, elaborate deception of faking our child's death and forcing me to live under that grief for 31 years. Laura's elaborate life as Jane Doe collapsed instantly. Her business was frozen. Her reputation was ruined. She was utterly ruined by the law and by her own choices, all while her true daughter was recovering in a hospital room hundreds of miles away, unaware of the chaos she had caused. The confrontation with Sarah Jenkins came 6 months later, after she was strong enough to leave the hospital and move into a quiet, recovery apartment I purchased for her. I sat her down and gently introduced the evidence, the birth certificate, the old photos of her as a toddler with me, and the official records that proved her name was Sarah Hayes, and I was her father. I showed her the 2 headstones, the one that marked the lie, and the one that proved her life. The revelation was overwhelming, leading to weeks of intense therapy and confusion. She felt adrift, betrayed by the only parent she had ever known. It was during one of her most difficult therapy sessions that I finally allowed the detective to arrange a meeting between Sarah and Laura in the prison visiting room, before her final sentencing. I waited outside. Sarah walked in alone. When Sarah emerged, her eyes were tear-stained but resolute. She told me Laura had confessed everything, blaming her actions on a breakdown, on fear of my family, and on the desire for a better life. Sarah looked at me, her father, and finally, after 31 years, she called me Dad. She had seen the truth, not in the documents, but in the desperation of the woman who had stolen her, and the steadfast love of the man who had found her. Laura was sentenced to a lengthy prison term. Her punishment was not just the bars, but the knowledge that the daughter she had stolen and then failed to kill now knew the absolute truth about her deceit, and had chosen the man she abandoned. Sarah Hayes, my daughter, is thriving. She never went back to her old life or her old name. She is rebuilding her identity, piece by piece, anchored by the love of her father and the truth of her past. She is fiercely independent, a testament to her improbable survival. I sold my old gray house, the house of grief, and we started fresh, together. I look at her now, a vibrant, adult version of the 6-year-old I mourned, and know that her miracle was my redemption. The silence in my life is no longer the silence of the cemetery, but the comfortable, happy silence of a father and daughter finally home. Like this video if you think my daughter's recovery was the ultimate, satisfying justice against her mother. Subscribe for more stories about hidden lives and decades-long deceptions. And please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below. Do you think I should have allowed Sarah to meet Laura in prison? Or should I have cut the cord completely? I'll see you all in the next story.